It's drying up. It's getting nice outside. This is going to be a very interesting two authors that you're going to hear tonight. Can you hear me in the back? Thank you. Scott Anderson and Ari Shavit both wrote a book about the Middle East. Different people, different times, but as you're going to hear from Scott Anderson and as you're going to hear from Ari Shavit, the more things change, the more they remain almost exactly the same. I'm going to introduce both of the authors, then they're each going to speak to you for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to moderate a conversation with them and take questions from the audience. So write down your questions. When you ask them, just if you want to direct it to the two of them, that's fine. If you want to address it to one of them, then let us know. Let me first introduce Ari Shavit. He's the author of My Promised Land. He's an author, a commentator, and one of the most powerful voices in Israeli political thought today. Like many Israelis, he started out in the military as a paratrooper and ended up studying philosophy as a major at Hebrew University. That's what the military, that's what living in Israel, that's what being a Sabra does. He's won the 2013 Natan Book Award, and he really is a real Sabra. His great-grandfather came to Israel at the end of the 19th century. He was a British lawyer, and that's why when you hear him speak, you're going to hear the inflection of the British still after all these generations in his voice. And he was a founding father. He knew Herzl, and his father was a chemist who worked on building Israel's alleged nuclear program. From his perch at Haaretz, the land, he's moved, like many of us, I know like me, to the political center from the left. He asks in his book, is there anybody to talk to really, as he goes through the issues? As a friend of mine says, we have a beautiful house in a very bad neighborhood. My Promised Land is about his personal and his family's story, the history, and then the end of the book is his prophecy. And that's also what I'm going to ask him to spend some time to talk about his vision of where he sees Israel in the future. Our other speaker is Scott Anderson. Scott Anderson's book, Lawrence in Arabia, War, Deceit, Imperial Folly, and the Making of the Modern Middle East, is fascinating. It's a story not only of T.E. Lawrence, who you all know, if you didn't read the book but you saw the movie with Peter O'Toole, was a complicated man whose knowledge of military, history, and the Middle East was unprecedented for the time. Scott Anderson grew up in East Asia. His father worked in agriculture as an advisor for the American government. He's a novelist, a journalist, and a war correspondent, and the places that he has corresponded from, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, Chechnya, Sudan, and Northern Ireland. I actually went online to see a list of places that the State Department says you shouldn't go. Those are all of the places that he goes to. The movie Triage with Colin Farrell is based upon his novel, and Hunting Party, starring Richard Gere, was based on his work in Bosnia. What you don't know about him and you won't read is he's part owner of the Half King Bar. His partner in the bar is Sebastian Young, the author of The Perfect Storm. It's in Chelsea on 23rd and 10th, which is now the hottest area in New York, and I asked him how long ago he opened it, and he said 14 years. So, like my grandfather used to say, it's much better to be lucky than smart. I'd like to introduce as our first speaker, Ari Shavit.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here. It was worthwhile writing a book just to come to Miami for my first time in my life. I've been several times in Florida, but sometimes I never got to the very end. And from the moment I landed, actually only thinking about Miami on the plane, but definitely landing, immediately I felt at home. I mean, there is something warm and sensual and passionate here, which I recognize and I love. So I'm looking forward to get to know the city a bit, but I already like it very much. Why did I write My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel? There have been so many books written about Israel, very good books, many of them, most of them, biographies, polemics, history, academic books. But my feeling was that for a long time, very long time, there has not been a book written that was a personal, deep, soul-searching of an Israeli, trying to understand what his nation is really about. Where is it coming from and where it is going to. And I think that's no accident. I think that the reason that such a book has not been written for such a long time was because we Israelis have lost our narrative. But not only we have lost our narrative, but the people caring about Israel and the people talking about Israel and the people criticizing Israel and the people hating Israel lost the narrative. We are so bogged down to the details, to the everyday friction, to the tension, to the events. We are so, in a sense, corrupted by the internal debates, the tribalism, the hate, all the venom that goes along with the discussion about that country, that all of us lost sight of the big picture. I'm no historian. My book deals with history, but it's not a history book. My book deals with politics, but it's not a political book. My book has strategic insights. It deals with the economy, with social matters, but I'm no sociologist, no strategist, no general. What I thought needs to be done is to write a story that brings down all the things that we are dealing with back to the human level, to enable us all to have a fresh look at what's going there, so we have a better understanding of it that is both more reasonable, more realistic, but also more fair. I think that this kind of situation, to quote Tom Friedman, who wrote about my book, that you have either the Israel can do no wrong approach or Israel can do no right approach is ridiculous. It's flawed intellectually and morally. And in a sense, I wanted to write a book that takes Israel, the cliché, and makes it into a real entity. A book that enables one to love Israel again, but in a realistic, critical, and moral way. So what did I do? I will not tell you all that is there. I hope that you will read it. But I began with the arrival of my great-grandfather in April 1897, coming from London to Jaffa. And I basically asked myself, why did he come